Okay. Um, so, good evening. Let me bring up the poems for tonight. Okay. So, the poem we're looking at tonight is called the first one, Jews in the Land of Israel. Um, and I'll just read it and we can discuss. We forget where we came from. Our Jewish names from the exile give us away. Bring back the memory of flower and fruit, medieval cities, metals, knights who turned to stone, roses, spices whose scent drifted away, precious stones, lots of red, handicrafts long gone from the world. The hands are gone too. Circumcision does it to us, as in the Bible story of Shem and the sons of Jacob, so that we go on hurting all our lives. What are we doing coming back here with this pain? Our longings were drained together with the swamps. The desert blooms for us, and our children are beautiful. Even the wrecks of ships that sank on the way reached this shore. Even winds did, not all the sails. What are we doing in this dark land with its yellow shadows that pierce the eyes? Every now and then someone says, even after 40 or 50 years, the sun is killing me. What are we doing with these souls of mist, with these names, with our eyes of forest, with our beautiful children, with our quick blood? Spilled blood is not the roots of trees, but it's the closest thing to roots we have.
Wow.
Yeah. Thoughts, questions, comments?
This was written in Hebrew?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
And did he put it into English or?
No, I mean, Amichai generally worked with his translators. I mean, his English was not, at the level where he would be able to translate his own poetry into English, but he would work with the translators. That's
Okay.
true of most Israeli
Yeah.
authors. Their English is certainly good enough that they can, say, "Oh, that's not what I meant," or
Yeah.
whatever, and
Now,
approve
Rabbi,
the
have you
translation.
actually read this poem in Hebrew?
No.
Because I wonder how what your thought is, how the translation is.
Um, I haven't, but I assume that the translation is accurate. The last poem that we'll look at, I do have the Hebrew as well. Um, I mean, I actually think in some ways there are fewer biblical allusions, biblical or
Hmm.
rabbinic allusions in this than there are in some of the other poems that we looked at. And it's really, to me, it is a poem that explores the diaspora-ness, really, of the Jew, right? We forget where we came from, right? Our Jewish names give us away, right? I mean, it's like, where we came from, right? I mean, right, we came from Israel, but we also, most of us hadn't lived there for like 2,000 years or right. And if you look at, the I mean, sort of typical Jewish diasporic names, right? Flowers and fruit, right? I mean, so many Jewish names, right? I mean, think of, right, roses, right? Rosenberg, um, fruit, Appel, right? Medieval cities. So many of us have, names that go back to different cities in the metal, goldman, right? Knights who turn to stone, roses, spices, lots of red, Rothman, Rothenberg, Rothschild, right? Handicrafts long gone from the world, right? I mean, Mike, how long ago was your last ancestor a goldsmith?
A Goldman?
A goldsmith,
A
right? I mean,
gold.
presumably Goldman, because somebody in your family was a gold.
I don't know. I majored in economics because of it, but I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think that when I read the papers from the ship's log, it said Goikerman, and I don't know where the Goldman, whether the myth is that the customs and immigration guys were changing names, but
No,
that's not
never
true.
happened. Never
That didn't
happened.
happen,
Never,
right?
never happened.
So somewhere along the way, Goikerman, I believe, it couldn't be a coincidence that they're both with G, but the only
Yeah.
paper I found said Goikerman and not Goldman.
Okay. Well, maybe they changed it to Goldman because they didn't want people to know they were Jewish.
Maybe. Was this guy living in Israel? Was he writing about Israel or writing about the diaspora?
No, he was writing about Israel. He was writing about Israel, but in this particular poem, he's exploring the question really of Jews. I mean, he was born in Germany. Okay, he made Aliyah when his family made Aliyah shortly after the Nazis took over. So he was I think 10 or 11 when his family came.
So what's he talking about? What are we doing coming back here with this pain? Our longings were drained together with the swamps. I mean, Israel drained the swamps, but the object, it was not pain and it was not longings drained. It was finally realized.
Well, but this is poetry, Mike. It's not journalism.
Yeah,
I
but the
mean,
guy's got something to say and it's not making sense to me.
well, I think, all right. I mean, I think what he's wondering, and I think we'll see this in the last poem as well, is look, Amichai. All right. So first of all, Amichai was not his original name. It was Pfeffer. Okay, it was Pfeffer. All
Say it
right,
again.
Pfeffer. Okay, he grew up Orthodox, had an Orthodox education, but identified as a secular Jew, right? But he knew biblical and rabbinic literature backwards and forwards. All right. But if you look at, so the fourth stanza, what are we doing in this dark land with its yellow shadows that pierce the eye? Every now and then someone says, even after 40 or 50 years, the sun is killing, right? I mean, in particular, German Jews, right? I mean, because the German Aliyah was the least ideological of any of the pre-state Aliyot, right? If you came from Russia in 1911 or in 1920, it was because you were a Zionist, right? It wasn't just to get out of Russia. Because if you just wanted to get out of Russia, you went to America, you went to Canada, you went to South Africa, you went to Mexico, right? Nobody went to Israel just to get out of Russia, right? They went to Israel because they were committed to living in Israel. Okay, when the Nazis took over in Germany, right? We know this. The gates pretty much everywhere were closed, right? So I mean, I looked up the other day this other poet who was a contemporary of Amichai named Natan Zach. Okay, Natan Zach, I looked him up because, I heard a couple of they're poems of his that were set to music that I really liked, that I had known for a long time, but I didn't know very much about Natan Zach. And Natan Zach was considered like um if Amichai was, let's say, the Michael Jordan of Israeli poets, which he was, then Zach was like the Scottie Pippen. He was like not quite up there, but pretty much up there. Okay, and Natan Zach was born in Germany, 1930. His family moved to Israel in 1936, and he was the product of a mixed marriage. Okay, he wasn't even halakhically Jewish. I mean, I don't know if he went through a conversion at some point. Okay, but his father was Jewish, his mother was Catholic. They didn't go to live in Israel in 1936 because they were Zionists. They went to live in Israel in 1936 because they were living in Germany. The Nazis took over, and they went to wherever they could go.
So
Right?
that is,
So there were German. The point is, I mean, again, I don't know how much of this I know it because I lived it. Right? Is that there were German Jews who lived in Israel 40, 50, 60 years and never managed to learn Hebrew. Okay, never managed to learn Hebrew. And so this line, every now and then someone says, even after 40 or 50 years, the sun is killing, right? That they live here, but they're not of here, right? They live here, that they're not of here. And I think Amichai is also wondering, to what now, of course, Amichai died in 2000. Okay, I don't know exactly when this poem was written, but it obviously was written 2000 or earlier, right? And there's a generation and a half of Israelis since then, right? But for Amichai, this question of belonging to the land, I mean, it's like, to me, one of the greatest metaphors, okay, is that if you drive through the Galilee, okay, or Wadi Ara in northern Israel, you're driving on the highway, and there's all kinds of little towns off in the distance, right? And I don't know about you, but I can look at a town off in the distance and I immediately know if it's a Jewish town or an Arab. Immediately. Okay? By the architecture. Okay? Jewish Israeli architecture struggles against the terrain. Palestinian Arab architecture is in harmony with the terrain. Okay? And that's the difference. I mean, perhaps Israel will develop a vernacular architecture that is not struggling against the terrain, right? But I had a discussion actually recently with an Arab friend of mine who's an architect, right? And he put up, I mean, he's an interesting, I won't go into everything about him. He's an interesting character. He's a Salafi Muslim who loves Jews. Okay, hates Israel but loves Jews. Okay, and he put a picture of a town in Palestine in the 1930s, and says, they say they came to an empty land, but look at this land. And I sent him a note. I said, "Hey Tom, that's Tel Aviv. Okay, that's Tel Aviv in the 1930s. And I say I can tell immediately by looking at, because it's Bauhaus architecture. Okay, and Tel Aviv has the greatest collection of Bauhaus architecture in the world. Why? Because all of these German Jewish architects moved to Tel Aviv in the 30s, and they brought with them the vernacular that they knew. And he looked at it and he said, "You're right. What an idiot I am. Of course it's Tel Aviv. Of course it's Bauhaus, because he knows he's an architect." Um, so that picture didn't prove what he wanted it to prove, right? Um, but the point is that you know Amichai is asking questions about the meaning of Jewish existence, the meaning of Jewish existence at all, and then the meaning of Jewish existence in the land of Israel, right? And um, I mean, it's interesting that we're reading this poem. So if you look at the second paragraph, circumcision does it to us, as in the Bible story of Shem and the sons of Jacob, so that we go on hurting all our lives. Okay, I mean this is from last week's parsha. This is from last week's parsha, right? What is the story of Shem and the sons of Jacob? Right, right. The Shem raped Dinah, right, and then he fell in love with her, and he said, "You have to let me marry her," right? And Shimon and Levi said, "Yeah, of course, we'll let you marry her, and right, we'll become one tribe, we'll become one nation, but you guys all have to be circumcised." Right, so that they went, and then while they're still recovering from the circumcision, Shimon and Levi go in and kill everyone. Right, so circumcision does this to us, and we go on hurting all our lives.
So
Right?
you don't take that paragraph to refer to what he probably personally went through in order to become converted officially and be
No,
Jewish?
because that was not Tanzak. This is Amichai talking about a different person.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and you're Mike. You're reading this much too literally. This is all metaphor, right? I mean, it's all meta. That's what poetry is. It's metaphor, right? But we go on hurting all our lives, right? I mean, now is it literally true that we carry the pain of circumcision with us all our lives? I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be me but not circumcised, right? But the point is that it marks us, and we carry that pain with us, right?
You know,
And
you're saying pain, but in a larger sense, you're a part of the covenant at that point. And so you have the obligations and the responsibilities, and there is a pain to that.
right.
It's a different level, and I don't think this is what he meant. And I'm being way too literal with it. But this this is more poetic than some of the works that I've seen. Some of the works I've seen from him in his class, it's like he's a prophet. You know,
Hmm.
he's trying to call back people to a way things should be. This isn't that. This is more of a rumination.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. Um, but he's talking about, all right, so our eyes of our beautiful children, right, are quick blood, right? Because Israelis, I mean, especially, I mean, there's this Sabra myth, right? That Jews born in Israel, have a sort of different essence than Jews of the diaspora, right? I don't know that it's true, but that was certainly the myth that Amichai would have been raised on, right?
What was the word? A different what?
A different essence, almost.
I can't hear it.
Essence.
Ah, okay.
Rabbi, you can say that, but for instance, right now we have all this things where these presidents of the Ivy League colleges made fools of themselves
Sure.
and really hadn't prepared properly in any way, sense, or shape or form, so that people who really aren't the best questioners in the world were able to throw real hardballs at them. But you can't tell me that people who are veterans of Mossad, if they were at University of Pennsylvania or somebody writes something on their door that they're going to run around and say, "Oh my gosh, the sky is falling." It's different. It's a different attitude.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I'm really not so sure about that. I mean, I do think that there is, I mean, I don't even know how to say this, all right? But I don't know how to. I know what I know what I'm thinking, but I don't know how to say this. I mean, I do think that there is a certain. I mean, what Salo Baron called, and I mean, it ties into some of the things I'm planning to say in the Kiddush conversation on Shabbat, right? But Salo Baron, the great historian at Brandeis, or Columbia rather, wrote about what he called the lachrymose conception of Jewish history, right? What is Jewish history? The parade of pogroms and crusades and massacres, right? That's what Jewish history is. And I think that in Israel, there is this lachrymose conception of Jewish history, no less than there is in the diaspora, frankly. Now, having said that, look, October 7th gives rise to that lachrymose conception, right? I mean, it was a pogrom and it was the worst, the most Jews killed in a single day since the Holocaust. Um, and I mean, you can be paranoid and still have real enemies, um, which I think is precisely the situation right now. Um, both in Israel and in the I mean, it's a very, I mean, thinkers that I respect, are struggling with the question of whether something really has fundamentally changed about Jewish existence in the last 2 months. And in the Jewish side, and I think it's way too early to answer that question. Right? We'll know the answer to that question in 50 years when none of us will be around. But but that's really what Amichai is talking about, is the Jewish psyche. So I love the last paragraph, and then we'll go on to the next poem. Spilled blood is not the roots of trees, but it's the closest thing to roots we have.
I thought that was a wonderful passage. I really do.
Right. A very, very powerful thing, right? We don't have, right? Amichai is saying what? We don't have roots in this land, right? except for the spilled blood. Right now, the question is who spilled blood, right? I mean, because again, you see all these connections, right? Bob Dylan had a song that came out a few years ago, which I thought was called "I Pay in Blood." Okay, but the refrain of it is "I pay in blood, but not my own." Right, and so spilled blood is not the roots of trees, but it's the closest thing to roots we have. Who spilled blood? Right, the spilled blood of Israeli soldiers, or the spilled blood of Arabs? Right? Because all it says is spilled blood. It doesn't say our spilled blood, right?
It's also the spilled blood of victims.
Right, right. But it's also, I mean, there was a poem like so before Amichai, right? The poet laureate, I mean, not an official title, but the acknowledged sort of king of Hebrew poetry was a guy by the name of Natan Alter. Um, and Alterman in 49 or 50 wrote a poem called Magash HaKesef, the silver platter. Okay, because Chaim Weizmann said, the Jewish state, because he was the head of the Zionist movement before the state of Israel. I mean, he became first president of Israel, but by then he was sort of, right, this old lion to whom everybody paid respect but had no real power, right? The Jewish state will not be given to us on a silver platter, right? And Alterman wrote this poem called The Silver Platter, where these two young people, a young man and a young woman, come back from the grave, right? And so, and the passersby say, who are these people? They are the silver platter, right? And in 1950, everybody knew what that meant, right? That who is, you know, yeah, Israel was given to us on a silver platter. Who is the silver platter? The silver platter is our children who lost their lives, right? Who lost their lives to create this, right? Um, all right. So um, let's go on to the next poem. A man doesn't have time in his life. A man doesn't have time in his life to have time for everything. He doesn't have seasons enough to have a season for every purpose. Ecclesiastes was wrong about that. A man needs to love and to hate at the same moment, to laugh and cry with the same eyes, with the same hands to throw stones and to gather them, to make love in war and war in love, and to hate and forgive and remember and forget, to arrange and confuse, to eat and to digest what history takes years and years to do. A man doesn't have time. When he loses, he seeks. When he finds, he forgets. When he forgets, he loves. When he loves, he begins to forget. And his soul is seasoned. His soul is very professional. Only his body remains forever an amateur. It tries and it misses, gets muddled, doesn't learn a thing, drunk and blind in its pleasures and its pain. He will die as figs die in autumn, shriveled and full of himself and sweet, the leaves growing dry on the ground, the bare branches pointing to the place where there's time for everything.
This is one where I think he's much more in his prophet mode. And I think of the ones that I've read, I thought that was really superb because it captures the complexity of human existence.
Mm-hmm.
And it does it from a poetic sense, from an intellectual sense, but that's not the right word. It's a poetic sense, but also and also in a realistic sense. I think that's a wonderful poem.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. I mean, I first of all, I love, because, of the, of here, there really is an interaction with sources, right?
Right.
Ecclesiastes was wrong about, right? I mean, that's something that I mean, you don't even have to be Jewish to know this, right? Because all you have to do is have been alive in the 60s, right?
Right.
And heard either Pete Seeger or the Byrds, right, performing Turn, 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 right? So if you were alive and conscious in the 60s, right? To everything, there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, right? A time to love and a time to hate, right? And what Amichai is saying, I think, is that, I mean, Ecclesiastes had that very, very neatly, but in real life, it, it's not, it's not so simple. And it occurred to me, I said when we started this mini course, more than a month ago, right? That to me, even though Amichai died in 2000, his poems are as relevant today as they were when he wrote, right? And this, I think, to me, is a brilliant example of that. I mean, if you look at what is going on in Israel in the last couple of weeks, right? I mean, is it the time to rejoice over the 100 some odd hostages who were released? Or is it the time to be angry and sad and distressed about the 137 who are still being held? Right? And the answer to that is both, right? It's both. And it's a weird feeling, right? It is a weird, am I allowed to be happy? Right? Am I allowed to be happy? Right? And when you see, like, because everything circulates on social media today, right? So I saw this video of the 5-year-old girl who was one of the hostages, her first day back at kindergarten, right? And how her teacher and all her classmates greeted her and gave her hugs, right? And it's joyful. But are you allowed to be joyful? I, but can you not be, right? And so you have to love and hate at the same moment. You have to laugh and cry with the same eyes, right? Because life doesn't split up so neatly into categories like Ecclesiastes would tell us, right? And frankly, I mean, here I think, and Amichai would probably agree with me, right? I mean, the basic sort of Jewish rabbinic question, right, is mutar or asur, right? Is this permitted or forbidden, right? The whole Talmud is 900 pages of mutar o asur, right? Permitted or forbidden, right? But sometimes it's not so easy, right? I mean, it's not so easy. And once you get into, the tough cases, the very same action can be permitted or forbidden depending on who's doing it or what. The very the very same piece of meat can be permitted or forbidden depending on all these kind of circumstances, right? I mean, life is complicated, and frankly, we want it to be simple, right? We want it to be simple. We want, I mean, I know that when somebody comes to me and says, "Rabbi, I have a quick question," okay, and immediately the question may be quick, the answer is not going to be right, and and they want a yes or no, right, and they already know what answer they want, and maybe they'll get it, maybe they won't, right? But it's not always so simple. It's not always so easy, right? But we have to die, and then he moved on, right? It's interesting, right? So our soul is seasoned, right? Our soul is professional. Our body remains an amateur, right? And I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, is he saying we learn? I mean, I would hope that as we get older, we learn, right? I would hope that as we get older, we learn and our soul does get more seasoned. But, it's not like our body doesn't change. But in some ways, I guess in some ways, actually, our soul and our body are on opposite trajectory, right? I mean, as our soul gets like better and more experienced and handles things better, our body loses its skill, And I mean, I know that, like, for me, and I'm younger than all of you guys, right? It's like every morning I wake up to a novel pain that I never had. Like, oh, that's an interesting pain I never felt, right? I mean, our body gets muddled, doesn't learn a thing, right? I don't know. Any other thoughts on this poem? All right. So let me. All right. So I wanted to find. I mean, I was looking for. I thought I'd give you a Hanukkah gift, so I thought I tried to find a poem that dealt with Hanukkah, but I couldn't. But I found this poem, and I thought that this would be. So this has the Hebrew too. All right. I'll just read the English, but I'll point out some of the things where the Hebrew is relevant. All right. The parents of a certain man gave him a diaspora name, only borne by very old Jews who pray a lot. His friends gave him a wild name, seeing as how he became a mighty paratrooper. And he raised horses all over the world and then returned to raise them in the mountains of the Galilee. His parents had a women's lingerie shop, girdles for the heavy, delicate bras, and silk underwear for the delicate. And anyone who laughs to hear of such a generation gap as this, anyone who even smiles, doesn't understand anything about wild horses, about Canaanite names, or about diaspora names. neither about the mountains of the Galilee, nor about women, not about women's garments, not about upper realms or under, and not about the land of Israel or about the generation. Okay, and again, so I'll just point out. I mean, first of all, this is a very Israeli poem, right? I mean, you know, how one goes from, Ludwig Pfeffer to Yehuda Amichai, right? Ludwig Pfeffer and Yehuda Amichai are the same person, right? And I mean, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that I was, it's interesting that the things that pop into your head, right, is that for a long time, I mean, Ben Gurion decreed that you could not be a cabinet minister or a member or an Israeli ambassador unless you had a Hebrew last name. Okay, and that's how Golda Meir became Golda Meir. She was Golda Meir, right? And when he appointed her as the Israeli ambassador to the USSR, she had to change her name from Meyerson to Meir, right? But, it's interesting to me that she couldn't be Golda Meyerson, she had to be Golda Meir, but she could be Golda Meir, and she didn't have to be Zahava Meir, which I'm not sure I understand that, right? But that's how, but of course, Ben Gurion was not born Ben Gurion. He was green and he became Ben Gurion, right? And, so on and so forth. So people had to change, Hebraize their names, right? And if you know somebody, I mean, you can often like figure out what their original name was, right? Like if I meet an Israeli whose last name is Zahavi, right? He was almost certainly Goldman, right? And if it's Har Zahav, then he was Goldman, right? I mean, because people just translate they just translate their names, right? But here he's talking about a diaspora person, right? And I remember I read a short story. I don't remember whether it was by Amos Oz or by Aleph et Yehoshua about this fight that this family had about what first name to give their kid. And one of the parents said, "No, we can't give that kid a name. It's too. I mean, a diaspora name. The Hebrew says Shem Galuti, right? Galut doesn't really mean diaspora. It really means exile. But if you said an exilic name, nobody in English, nobody would know what that is, right? But there are, lots of, and in that sense, I do think I wonder if Israelis are becoming like more Jewish in that sense because he talks here about Canaanite, right? Like there are a lot of names that, like, if you ever met an Israeli named Nimrod, right? That was a Canaanite, right? They adopt because there was this whole movement in Israel called the Canaanite, right? And there was this idea, and Amichai was not a Canaanite, right? But quite the opposite. He tied himself to Jewish Israel. But there was this idea that all of Jewish history, from the destruction of the Second Temple to the rise of the Zionist movement, was a mistake. Okay, it was a mistake. And what we had to do was go back to our pagan Canaanite roots, right? We're not Jews, right? And that's why, for example, I mean, many people, and I mean, Toby, your late husband would have known all, right? This whole idea of people who they didn't even want to call themselves Jews. They called themselves Hebrew, right? They called themselves Hebrew. And there would be signs on buses, or two people could be speaking Yiddish on a bus, and somebody would come up to them and say, Ivri, daber Ivri, right? Hebrew, speak Hebrew. They didn't want to be Jews. They wanted to be Hebrew, and that whole, right? And so, but Amichai is saying quite the opposite, right? If you think that by going from this Galuti name to this Canaanite name, and going, from parents who own a lingerie shop to a son who became, this mighty paratrooper and then this world famous horse breaker, if you laugh to hear of this generation gap, then you don't understand anything, right? You don't understand anything about Eretz Yisrael or Toldot Yisrael, the generations or the history of Israel. That this transformation, right, from a nation of small shopkeepers to a nation of mighty paratroopers took place in one generation, right? It took place in one generation. And I have to say that it occurs to me. I mean, you look, because I've been watching a ton of Israeli news the last 2 months, right? And you watch these briefings, by the various IDF spokespeople, whether they're briefings in Hebrew or in English, because it doesn't matter to me, right? And you see, like, Jews, right? Jews, and if they had grown up in America, they'd be, a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor or an insurance salesman, or a professor, and not a colonel or a general, right? Because you look at them and you see Jews, you see us, right? But they're, a general or a colonel, not because that was their parents' dream. You know, I want my kid to be, a career IDF officer, right? They
Well,
became
yeah,
that
but
because
part of it,
that
they were
was
imbued.
what. Well, let me finish.
Yeah,
That was what the circumstances forced on them. Yeah, Alan, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But they're imbued with this spirit to be a military people and to protect. It's that whole what do you call it, the folks that grew up in the certain areas. I mean, and they really are. They're more military people from there, from the kibbutzes.
Yeah, I mean less so now than it used to be, but
But in this country, there were people who have the names of older people that prayed a lot because they passed on that name,
sure.
and they were in World War II, or they were in World War II probably, because that's when there were more people of a diverse basis, a diverse type that were in the military, and they didn't come back and work in their store. They took on some adventurous role. And that's anybody that has that spirit. You can talk about, I'm sure, Australians that have that and various other people. In this case, it's the Israelis but that they have that same sort of, it's us against them and we're going to do it. The can-do spirit, if you will.
Right, but but what I'm saying is that I think that that is forced upon them by circumstance.
Absolutely.
It's not, you know, they're Jews just like anybody, just like we are. And there's not a difference in essence, there's a difference in circumstance, right? I mean, it'd be interesting to ask Amichai which is the real Jew. You know, is it the parent, or is it the parent, or is it the son?
But if you read that poem we just read before, they coexist. It's a complex interrelationship.
Yeah, right. And you can be both at the same time,
That's right.
right? I mean, and this is one of the things that I haven't seen that much discussion of recently, but the question of whether the government or the IDF is not going to start to make decisions based on the fact that having 350,000 reservists mobilized can't last forever. I mean, what is it doing to the economy, right? I mean, it, you know, I mean, God forbid they should, make stupid military decisions based on concern that we can't keep these people mobilized forever, right? But on the other hand, they can't keep these people mobilized forever. I mean, forget about, and I honestly don't know, to what extent people still continue to draw what they were drawing while they were, employed in a civilian occupation. But, all of these businesses that can't function because half of their workforce is mobile. Problem. I mean, it's something that with our professional army in this country, we don't have to worry. There are all kinds of other costs of mobilization, but pulling hundreds of thousands of people out of civilian life isn't one of them. But in Israel, it is. It's a real issue. All right. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this immensely. I hope you did. And
Rabbi, let me just say that, and I said that in my note to you.
yeah,
This is disgusting. That we only have three people who are at this. You prepared. This is scholarly. This is enlightening. And I mean, I couldn't go to one of the lectures you had, and I watched the tape afterwards. But this really is a failure, in my opinion, on the part of our congregation not to have more people here and participate in this. But that's just my opinion. But thank you for what you've done.
well, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, happy Hanukkah.
And
Agreed.
same to
Thank you
you.
so
Thanks.
much.
See ya. Bye bye.
Have a good evening.
You too.